He's a burden, she said with a sigh. It wasn't sadness, it was exhaustion. I'm honestly so tired of taking care of him. Once he's gone, we can sell everything. The house alone is worth $800,000. This was my daughter talking to her husband just a few steps from my hospital bed. There was no tremor in her voice, no hesitation. She said it as if she were reading the weather forecast. Clear. Final. Before we continue, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. You have no idea how pale their faces turned when they realized I had already done it. I was supposed to die. That's what the doctor told me later. It was called a deep coma, the kind you don't come back from. But somehow I pulled myself out. And woke up just when I needed to. I woke to her voice, the voice of my daughter, speaking calmly to her husband. My body couldn't move, but my mind, oh my mind, was working at full speed. Thousands of thoughts, not a sound. Only the steady beep of the monitor next to me betrayed the fact that I was still here, still listening. Her husband, Bernd, shifted in his chair, and I heard the leather creak. Do you think he has a will? He asked. Emily replied, almost amused, even if he does, he's 20. I doubt my mother even signed it. It's all in his name. It's just a matter of time. Time. Funny word. The very thing they thought was ending for me turned out to be the only thing I had left. And I was going to use it. I don't remember anything else from that day. My eyes never opened. My hand never twitched. But something old inside me opened. Not anger, not even grief. Something colder, something sharper, like steel pulled from the snow. There comes a time in every man's life, I suppose, when he realizes he's become invisible. Not to the world yet, but to the people closest to him. The people who once looked at him as if he were building the stars with his own hands. Your usefulness fades. Your voice fades, and suddenly your presence is just background noise. A figure in the corner of family photos, a chair that's always occupied but never truly noticed. Emily wasn't always like this. Once she'd run barefoot across the lawn, just to jump into my arms when I came home from work. She would draw me pictures, little stick figure scenes with hearts and suns and the words, "Daddy is my hero." I kept one of them in my wallet for over 20 years. I wonder when she stopped seeing me that way. Did it happen when her mother died? When the house got quieter? Or was it the slow accumulation of my silence, my unwillingness to intervene, to control, to demand gratitude for the sacrifices I made? I gave her everything I could. I paid off her student loans, bought her first car, guaranteed her mortgage when she and Bernd couldn't get approved on their own. I gave so much that I never stopped to ask if she understood the weight of it. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe it was easier to believe that she still remembered who I was beneath the gray hair and hospital gowns. But that day, one sentence killed something inside me. Not my spirit. No, it was still whole. But the part of me that still foolishly hoped that I was loved the way I loved, that part died then. They stayed in the room for about 10 more minutes, talking quietly, checking their phones, briefly debating whether Bernd should call the realtor yet. He thought it was too early. She said Dad wouldn't want the house to sit empty. Ironically, considering the man who bought the land, laid every brick himself, and planted the maple tree in front of the house that still sheds its leaves like confetti every fall, was still breathing 5 feet away. As they left, I listened to the sound of Emily's heels fading away down the hallway. The rhythm used to make me smile. Now it made my jaw clench. Later, a nurse came in. Her name was Marta. I remember her smell, citrus and clean cotton. She adjusted my fore and hummed a tune I couldn't recognize. As she leaned over me, I tried to move my fingers, only to twitch. Nothing worked, but something in my brain started to ignite again, like a fuse slowly burning to something explosive. The next few days were a blur. But I was conscious, so painfully aware of everything. Every conversation, every assumption made in my supposed absence, every detail they thought was safe to discuss out loud. I learned more about my daughter in those 3 days of silence than I had in 10 years of phone calls and Sunday brunches. She had plans, big plans. Sell the house, take the money, move to Denver. Bernd wanted a new SUV. She wanted to invest. We can finally start that rental project, she said, laughing. You know how people love old family homes with a sad story. A sad story. That's who I've become. An old man in a hospital bed waiting to die, a chapter to close, a point in their financial planning. It was on one of those days that I began to formulate a plan. Nothing grand, nothing illegal. I wouldn't confront her. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't even raise my voice. He's a burden, she said with a sigh. It wasn't sadness. It was pure exhaustion. I'm honestly so tired of taking care of him. Once he's gone, we can liquidate the estate. The house alone's worth $800,000. That was my daughter talking to her husband, just a few feet from my hospital bed. There wasn't a tremble in her voice. No hesitation. She said it the way you might read off the weather. Clinical. Final. Before we continue, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. You can't imagine how pale their faces turned. When they realized what I had already done, I should have died. That's what the doctor said later. They called it a deep coma, the kind you don't walk away from. But somehow, I did. And I woke up at the exact moment I needed to. I woke up to her voice, my daughter's voice, saying calmly to her husband. My body couldn't move, but my mind, oh my mind, was sprinting. 1,000 thoughts, no sound. Only the steady beep of the monitor beside me gave away the fact that I was still here, still listening. Her husband, Brent, shifted in his chair, and I heard the leather creak. You think he has a will? Emily responded, almost amused. If he does, it's 20 years old. I doubt Mom even signed off on it. Everything's in his name. It's just a matter of time. Time. Funny word. The very thing they thought was running out for me turned out to be the only thing I still had, and I was going to use it. I don't remember much else from that day. My eyes never opened. My hand never twitched. But something ancient inside me cracked open. Not anger, not even grief. Something colder, something sharper, like steel pulled from snow. I suppose there's a point in every man's life when he realizes he's become invisible. Not to the world, not yet, but to the people closest to him. The people who used to look up at him as if he had built the stars with his own hands. Your usefulness fades. Your voice dims, and suddenly your presence is just background noise. A figure in the corner of family photographs, a chair that's always occupied, but never really noticed. Emily wasn't always like this. There was a time she'd run barefoot across the lawn just to jump into my arms when I got home from work. She used to draw me pictures, little stick figure scenes with hearts and sunshines and the words, "Daddy is my hero." I kept one in my wallet for over 20 years. I wonder when she stopped seeing me that way. Was it when her mother died? When did the house get quieter? Or was it the slow accumulation of my silence, my unwillingness to meddle, to control, to demand gratitude for the sacrifices I made? I gave her everything I could. Paid off her student loans, bought her first car, co-signed her mortgage when she and Brent couldn't get approved on their own. I gave so much that I never stopped to ask whether she understood the weight of it. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe it was easier to believe she still remembered who I was beneath the gray hair and hospital gowns. But that afternoon, that one overheard sentence killed something in me. Not my spirit. No, that was still intact. But the part of me that still hoped foolishly that I was loved the way I had loved. That part died right then. They stayed in the room another 10 minutes or so, talking in low voices, checking their phones, arguing briefly about whether Brent should call the real estate agent yet. He thought it was too soon. She said Dad wouldn't want the place to sit empty. Ironic, considering the man who bought that land, laid every brick with his own hands, and planted the maple in the front yard that still drops leaves like confetti every fall was still breathing 5 feet away. When they left, I listened to the fading sound of Emily's heels tapping down the corridor. That rhythm used to make me smile. Now it made my jaw tighten. A nurse came in later. Her name was Marta. I remember her scent, citrus and clean cotton. She adjusted my fore and hummed a tune I couldn't name. When she leaned over me, I tried to move my fingers, just a twitch. Nothing happened, but something in my brain began to light up again, like a fuse burning slowly towards something explosive. The next few days were a blur. But I was aware, so painfully aware. Every conversation, every assumption made in my supposed absence, every detail they thought was safe to say out loud. I learned more about my daughter in 3 days of silence than I had in 10 years of phone calls and Sunday brunches. She had plans, big ones. Selling the house, taking the money, moving to Boulder. Brent wanted a new SUV. She wanted to invest. We could finally start that Airbnb thing, she said, laughing. You know how people love rustic family homes with a sob story. A sob story. That's what I had become. An old man in a hospital bed waiting to die. A chapter to be closed. A bullet point in their financial planning. It was during one of those afternoons that I began to form the outline of a plan. Nothing grand, nothing illegal. I wouldn't confront her. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't even raise my voice. Of course not. My daughter wanted the house. She wanted my legacy to become cash. She wanted a fresh start. And I would give her one, just not the way she expected. It took another couple of weeks before I could move my hand. The first twitch nearly made Marta drop her tray. Mr. Whitmore, she gasped. Can you hear me? I blinked once, then twice. She called for the doctor. After that, things happened fast. Scans, tests, more blinking. One nurse cried. Another called me a miracle. But they didn't know what kind of miracle I was. Emily showed up the next day with flowers and a forced smile. Dad! Oh my God, you're awake. I didn't think. She trailed off, probably because she saw it. The way I was looking at her. Not like a father seeing his daughter, but like a man who had come back from the edge with new eyes. I didn't say much that day. My throat was sore and my body was weak. But my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I let her talk about the doctors, about all the prayers, about how difficult it had been. Brent and I were here every day, she said. It was a lie, and she knew that I knew it was a lie. A week later, I was discharged. They thought I'd want to go back to the house, to my house. Emily even offered to drive me, just until you get your strength back, she said. I declined. I told her I wanted to stay somewhere quiet for a while. But the truth was I didn't want to return as the man they expected. I had a new plan in mind, and the estate, well, that part would come next. The last time I had dinner in that house, the roast was dry and the wine was too sweet. Emily had made it clear it was only a small gathering, just her husband, Mark, and their teenage daughter, Sophie, who barely looked up from her phone. I was seated at the end of the table next to the sliding glass door that hadn't closed properly in years. A draft slipped in every time the wind picked up, but no one offered to move me. No one even noticed. I might as well have been the ghost of Thanksgivings past. Emily had prepared chicken cordon bleu from a frozen box. She even microwaved the hollandaise sauce. I remember that because Ellen used to make it from scratch, slow, precise, with lemon juice and real butter whisked over the stove. Ellen's dinners were warm, chaotic, and alive. This one felt like a corporate team-building exercise. At one point, Mark raised his glass and toasted to transitions, whatever that meant. Emily chimed in. Dad's finally going to a place where he can relax and be taken care of. It's time. I watched Sophie glance up just long enough to roll her eyes. Then she turned her AirPods back on. They had already begun rearranging the living room, my living room. The leather recliner I'd spent years breaking in had been moved to the garage. The bookshelves I built with my own hands were now filled with Sophie's cheerleading trophies. They called it updating the space. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. That's not who I am. I simply excused myself after dessert, went to the bathroom, and sat there for a long time, staring at the same tile floor Ellen once slipped on years ago while laughing too hard at a dumb joke I made. Her laughter used to fill this house. Now all I could hear was the dishwasher humming and the occasional ping from someone's phone. When I returned to the table, Mark was explaining the benefits of the care facility they had picked. They even have Wi-Fi and group yoga, he said, as if he were booking me a luxury hotel stay. Emily nodded along, then passed a folder to me across the table. Inside were printed pages, release forms, medical transfer documents, and a power of attorney with a blank signature line. I closed the folder slowly and asked one question: how long have you had this ready? Emily hesitated. A few weeks. We just wanted to make it easier on you. Easier. That word echoed in my ears the whole night. Easier for whom? When the night ended, I left the folder on the table. I didn't say goodbye, I just walked out into the chilly night air, gripping the keys to the house I no longer owned. Back in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wedding photo on the dresser. Ellen in her lace-trimmed veil, me in a suit that didn't quite fit. That photo had followed us through 3 moves, 2 recessions, and 1 cancer diagnosis. It belonged to no one but us. I looked around the room, the cedar chest, the wool blanket she knit before she got sick, the faint smell of lavender on the pillowcase. And then I made a decision. They wanted me gone. Fine. But I wasn't going to go quietly. I reached under the mattress, pulled out the old fireproof box, and opened it with the small brass key I kept on a chain around my neck. Inside were documents, the deed to the house, a copy of Ellen's will, our joint savings statements, and something else. Something I had almost forgotten existed. Morris was firm. We can't undo what's been signed, he said, looking over the existing documents my daughter had coerced me into signing 2 years ago. But we can challenge intent, especially given your wife's original draft and your mental state at the time. You mean the stroke? No, he said flatly. I mean grief. That word again. It was heavy and undeniable. He gestured toward the notarized letter from Ellen. This changes things. It won't win a courtroom on its own, but it lays the groundwork, especially if we can show undue influence. I nodded. And we'll need to do it quietly, he added. The element of surprise isn't just strategic, it's humane. You're not doing this to destroy them. You're doing it to reclaim what was stolen from you while you were still alive. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about the word stolen. It sounded so harsh, so criminal. But sometimes theft isn't about breaking locks, it's about breaking belief. And that's what they had done. My daughter had made me believe I was already dead. But I wasn't. I was waking up again, and this time, I was fully awake. The next few weeks passed like a quiet chess match. Margaret refiled the paperwork. Morris prepared the petition to freeze the property title under dispute. I sat through meetings where I barely spoke, but every nod felt like one more stone laid in the path back to my dignity. Then came the twist. My granddaughter, Sophie. One morning, she knocked on my door alone, without any warning. I opened it to find her standing there in a hoodie with her hair tied up and eyes that were red. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She sat at the kitchen table, clutching a coffee she'd bought for herself. She didn't buy one for me, classic teenager. She didn't talk for a long time, just stared at the wood grain in the table like it held answers she couldn't yet form. Finally, she whispered, "I heard them talking about the will. About putting you in a place where the paperwork would be easier. Mom said it's better to move things around before you start to forget who we are." She looked up at me. I don't know why that hit me so hard, but it did. I nodded. She continued, "They treat you like luggage, like something to be sorted, and I do not want to be that kind of adult." I watched her closely. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I want to be in the will," she said plainly. "But not for money." I raised an eyebrow. "For memory," she said, "for stories, for things they do not even ask about anymore." In that moment, I saw Ellen in her, the same spark, the same stubborn dignity. I stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out the cedar box Ellen had kept letters in. I placed it in front of Sophie. "Start here," I said. As she opened the lid, the scent of old paper and lavender filled the room. Perhaps not all was lost. Perhaps the next move was already writing itself. And maybe, just maybe, the final act would not be revenge, but resurrection. They thought I was asleep, incapacitated, out of the game. They forgot I had spent 38 years auditing books for people who lied for a living. That my hands had drafted wills, closed trusts, and managed endowments before they ever learned to sign their names in cursive. While they planned my burial, I was laying foundations, quiet ones. I did not always live like this, half shadow, half ghost breathing behind a curtain. But a man learns quickly when his daughter stares at his hospital bed and speaks of him in the past tense. And what I learned was this: love does not shield you. Paperwork does. Emily never asked why I insisted on keeping hard copies or why I handwritten updates to the will each spring, notarized every change, and had 3 witnesses sign in blue ink. "Dad, you are so old school," she used to say, laughing as she clicked her tablet screen, scanning dinner menus I could not pronounce. But the day she sued for conservatorship, her lawyer ran headfirst into a wall of notarized, time-stamped, and legally bulletproof silence. It began with the living trust. 8 years prior, I had moved every asset, from the house to the retirement accounts, into a trust titled not in my name, but in a shell foundation I had created with Nolan's help, the Whitmore Rural Preservation Fund. On paper, I was just a resident manager, a caretaker. The title was never mine, not legally, and certainly not hers. They tried to claim I had been mentally impaired when those documents were signed. But the irony was that the same physician who signed my medical release also signed my mental competency affidavit 6 months before my stroke. Emily's team did not even think to check. They assumed I was as sloppy as they were greedy. She looked shocked in court. The judge asked a simple question: can the plaintiff provide any documentation showing a legal claim to the property? Emily stammered. Her lawyer whispered. Their silence was more eloquent than any cross-examination. But the real checkmate came in Exhibit G, an audio file, a small, innocuous clip Nolan had helped me retrieve from the nanny cam in my study. It was Emily, pacing the room, unaware that the bookshelf was recording her. Her voice was crisp. "He won't even notice if we list it now. We can say it's for his medical bills. After he's gone, we'll say it was part of the estate transfer. No one needs to know." She said that while I was in recovery, relearning how to hold a spoon. When the judge played it out loud in the hearing room, I didn't look at her. I just folded my hands and stared at the marble floor. There was no victory in that moment, only confirmation. You see, people like Emily think betrayal is a transaction. But in truth, betrayal is a ledger. It records everything, even whispers, even silence, especially silence. That court day didn't end with her screaming like the movies might show. No, Emily stayed perfectly composed until we stepped into the hallway and she realized the press had picked up the story. Local woman sues elderly father for house she doesn't legally own. She lunged toward me, not violently, just urgently. Why are you doing this? I turned slowly, looked her in the eyes, and in that moment, I saw the little girl who used to braid Ellen's hair. The one who cried when her goldfish died. The one who once promised to take care of me when I was old. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just letting you reveal yourself. That silence again. Cold. Endless. But this time, I let it stretch between us like a curtain. She walked away. Later that week, her husband called Nolan, pretending it was all a miscommunication, that they'd misunderstood my intentions, that they were under financial stress and thought I had no use for such a large property. That word again, use. They still hadn't figured it out. I didn't protect the house because I needed it. I protected it so they wouldn't take it for granted. And now, the paperwork was done. The house was off limits. My pension was split into monthly disbursements to charities under my mother's maiden name. The life insurance was transferred to a local veteran scholarship fund. I had made myself untouchable, invisible but protected. One night, Nolan and I sat in his garage, the smell of varnish thick in the air. He was sanding down a cedar bench, and I just watched, my fingers folded over a mug of tea. She'll come back, he said eventually. Maybe. Do you want her to? I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because I knew too well. The house stood quiet that fall. The dogwood tree dropped its leaves slowly. The air began to shift. And somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear it, an estate agent's voicemail being deleted. A lawyer advising silence. A daughter realizing that no amount of shouting could erase a signature written with intention. They forgot the paper trail. But I never did. She came back on a Thursday, the kind of Thursday where the sky hangs low and colorless and the wind bites without reason. I was pruning the garden out front, my hands buried in damp earth, when I saw her car pull into the driveway like it still belonged there, a black Lexus, clean, polished, desperate for control. Emily stepped out slowly, her heels too high for the gravel. She wore beige, like she always did when she needed to look reasonable. "Dad," she said. I stood up slowly, wiped my hands on the towel tucked into my waistband, and looked at her. "I didn't call first," she added. "I wasn't sure if you would." "If I'd still be here," I said, my voice flat. She flinched, just slightly. "If you want to talk." I didn't invite her in. I simply stepped aside, giving her room to follow if she chose to. She did, after a pause. Her eyes darted toward the porch swing, the one she used to curl up on with Ellen on summer nights. She didn't sit. "I shouldn't have sued," she said after a long breath. My lawyer pushed it. I thought it was the only way to sort things out. "Things seem sorted to me," I said. "You wanted the house. You didn't get it. That's not fair." "No," I said, "but it's accurate." She turned then, her arms crossed. "You don't have to talk to me like I'm some stranger." "You're not a stranger," I said. "You're my daughter. That's what makes this harder." That shut her up for a moment. She walked to the porch railing and ran her fingers along the old wood. "I miss Mom." "So do I. She wouldn't want us like this." "No," I said. She wouldn't. But she's not the one who tried to sell the house before I was cold in the ground. Her shoulders tightened. "I never meant to sell it without your knowledge." That was exaggerated. Your voice on the nanny cam wasn't exaggerated. She fell silent. I watched carefully. This was not an apology visit. This was a reconnaissance mission. She wanted to see how far the damage had spread and if there was any way back. "I came because..." She paused, then continued, "because I heard you were giving everything to charity." I didn't answer. She looked at me, her gaze sharp and frightened. "Dad, I'm your daughter." "That's right," I said. "It meant something once. Do you really care what happens to me?" "That's the wrong question." You should ask why you stopped caring about what happened to me. Silence again. She enveloped the porch like a fog. She tried, but the words wouldn't come out. She looked down. It got out of hand. It didn't get out of hand, Isabel. You gave it all away. She blinked quickly. Her makeup didn't run, but her dignity did. I still remember what you told me after Mom's funeral, I continued. You said it was time for me to start thinking about my legacy, Dad, about simplifying things. I thought you meant grief. You meant assets. That's not true. You also said I should consider moving into one of those nursing homes, with meals. You gave it as a retirement gift. And that was an exile with monthly bills. She shook her head. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. I let the words hang between us, cold and final. She glanced out the window. So how is it? Have you cut me off from everything? No, I said. Only from the parts you never had a right to. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I stepped off the porch and went back into the garden. I needed to trim the rosemary. The earth felt good on my hands. She stayed there for another minute or two, looking at me, waiting for something that wouldn't come. Then I heard the Lexus door open. Close, a crunch of gravel, silence again. She didn't even know the half of it. Because Isabel didn't realize that no one in her little circle of con artists knew that I had already begun to change the tide. Legacy isn't about money. It's about meaning. A few months before that Thursday, I had quietly established a scholarship fund at my alma mater, the Walter A. Pierce Fellowship for First-Generation Engineers. It wasn't huge, but it was permanent, and her name was on it. There would be nowhere. I also organized a small grant program at a local shelter where Sarah used to volunteer. They called it Sarah's Garden. They planted tomatoes and lavender in her honor. And then there was Oliver. When I handed him the sealed envelope with the document to my house outside the city, he shook his head and tried to hand it back. You helped me rebuild my hands, I told him. I'm giving you a place to rest yours. Then he cried. It was the first time I'd seen him cry since the army. You even had contingencies for emotional abuse, financial coercion, and legal manipulation, she said, reading over the paperwork. You gave yourself a way out. You were planning for this for years. I had time. You did more than prepare, she said. You anticipated. That is how I made it to retirement, I replied, and stayed alive in the military. That is when she leaned forward. I want to represent you. And so she did. Over the next few weeks, Ms. Ingrid Weber filed a quiet motion to countersue. Not for money, but for the deliberate infliction of emotional distress and fraudulent meddling with a protected estate. Most sons or daughters do not see that coming. Isabel certainly did not. She called the house again, left voicemails. I did not answer. Ms. Weber said, let the silence speak. It will be more unsettling than any words. But it was not just Isabel who felt the tremor. That week, her husband Hans called me from an unknown number. Walter, come on, he began. This is getting out of hand. I did not start it, I said. You could have just called us, talked through it like adults. You mean the way you both talked about how to get me institutionalized? The way you priced out the antique piano before Sarah's funeral was even over? A pause. Then we never meant to get caught, I finished for him. He went quiet. Then he tried a different tactic. This could be damaging for everyone. I nearly laughed. Hans, I said, you are trying to negotiate with a man who already gave up everything that made him soft. And I hung up. Later that evening, Ms. Weber called with news. They have filed for a delay, she said, claiming they need time to gather new documents. It is likely a stall. They are panicking. They should be. I leaned back in my chair. The window behind me framed a quiet yard, with fireflies blinking along the fence like tiny messengers from the past. I thought of Sarah, her garden gloves, her church voice, her eyes when she caught me watching her across the dinner table. She once told me justice is just the long game of love. I did not understand it then. I do now. Because what I was doing, what Ms. Weber was doing, was not revenge. It was realignment. It was walking the foundation and finding the cracks. And instead of patching them, I chose to tear down the rotten beams and rebuild, brick by deliberate brick. And there was one more brick to place. Because what neither Isabel nor Hans realized was that they were not the only ones being watched. Ingrid had uncovered something deeper in their accounts, an unreported inheritance from Hans's uncle, funneled quietly into shell LLCs they created after Sarah died. Money that should have gone to taxes. Money they tried to hide. It is enough, Ms. Weber said, to open a federal case. I stayed silent for a long moment. Then I said, do it. Because this was no longer about teaching them a lesson. It was about making sure the next man who gets called a burden does not have to prove he is not one by becoming a ghost. It was about the quiet ones, the forgotten ones, the ones who built things with their bare hands and were told they had no legacy. By the end of the week, Hans's employer received an anonymous tip from a legal compliance firm. By the end of the month, the IRS opened an audit. And Isabel, she showed up one morning, banging on the front door. I did not open it. Not because I hated her, but because she still had not figured out which door she had closed first. She screamed like the world owed her something. From the quiet of the rental car parked 2 houses down beneath the sweet gum tree I planted back in 1991, I could hear it as clear as a whistle. Her voice, sharp and unrestrained, bounced off the brick walls of the empty house she thought was hers. It is locked. The key will not work. Hans, what the heck is going on? I did not move, just sat there watching through the windshield, the air conditioning humming low, a bottle of unsweetened tea resting on my knee. From this distance, I could see her jiggling the doorknob like a child denied dessert. Hans tried both of his keys, one from his pocket, another from under the fake rock Isabel had smugly positioned by the hydrangeas last spring, thinking she was so clever. Neither worked. That was by design. A week earlier, the locks had been changed. The deed updated. The bank accounts tied to that property emptied, frozen, and redirected under the nonprofit's trust. Isabel did not know that yet. She just knew something was wrong, and she was loud about it. Call the locksmith, she shouted. Call the darn bank. Dad must have screwed something up before he croaked. Charming, but I did not react. That word did not sting anymore. Not after what I heard in that hospital room. Hans took out his phone. I watched his shoulders slump. He paced to the edge of the lawn, already browning without my weekly watering, and called someone. I did not need to hear the conversation to know what he was discovering. They had found out what I wanted them to find out, in the exact order I wanted them to find it. A week earlier, I had signed the final property transfer with Ms. Weber. She gave me a glance that lingered a little longer than usual. You are sure about this? That afternoon, the documents were formally filed. They named the trust the Sarah May Foundation, in honor of my late wife, and it was designated as a permanent community sanctuary. There was one key clause: no immediate family member of the founder could ever live there, not even for a night. This wasn't about being petty, it was about protecting a legacy from those who had shown they had no respect for it. Back in the driveway, Isabel had collapsed onto the steps, her face red, shouting into her phone. Hans was standing further away, his voice now a low, tight monotone. I could see the change in him from my car. He wasn't enraged anymore, he was doing calculations. Isabel threw her purse across the porch. I had almost forgotten how dramatic she could be when things didn't go her way. When she was a little girl, she once broke all of her crayons because I wouldn't give her ice cream before dinner. At 17, she slashed the tires of her ex-boyfriend's car after he flirted with her friend. Now, at 38, she was having a meltdown on a porch she didn't own. Time hadn't matured her, it had only given her more expensive toys to throw. I didn't need to stay much longer. The scene was playing out exactly as I had planned it. But just as I put the key in the ignition, I heard a new voice, a child's. "Mommy, I'm hungry." I froze. I hadn't realized they had brought Greta, my granddaughter. She must have been in the back seat the entire time, sleeping. Isabel's voice softened, the only human sound she'd made all day. "I know, baby. We'll go get food in a second." My hand hesitated over the gearshift. For a moment, I doubted everything. Had I gone too far? Was it fair to punish a child for her parents' mistakes? But then I remembered something. Greta was the same girl who used to leave me drawings on the fridge, who would crawl onto my lap and whisper stories about how the son was tired and needed a nap, too. The same child Isabel had once scolded for wasting paper on Grandpa again. Greta was full of love, I had seen it, and I knew exactly how to protect it. That night, I made one final call to Ingrid. "Add another clause," I said. "If Greta chooses, she can have a scholarship through the foundation. No limits. Let her go as far as her heart wants." Ingrid didn't ask why. She simply said, "I'll make sure it's legally sound." I believed her. The next morning, the locksmith came. Isabel and Hans paid for the new locks themselves. But when they opened the door, they found nothing but an echo. The furniture was gone, photos removed, and the rugs donated. Not a single memory of mine was left in that place. Just one letter on the fireplace mantel, sealed in a cream envelope, addressed to Isabel. It read, "Ownership is not the same as entitlement. You knew the value of the house, but you never knew its cost." I never heard from them again. But a week later, a photo arrived in my mailbox, a crayon drawing of a house, a tree, and two stick figures holding hands. One was labeled me, the other, Grandpa. It was signed in pink, Greta. I framed it. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not from revenge, but from a deeper understanding. A legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about who you leave it for. I used to believe that in a storm, families held on tighter. But not them, not Isabel and Hans. They scattered like dry leaves in the wind. I don't know exactly when their relationship started to fall apart, but I know the exact moment it all came to light. It was the day Hans went to the county records office to get a copy of the house deed. Not because he missed me, but because he wanted to be in control. Isabel had promised him everything, that the house was secure, my assets would be hers, and that there was no need for lawyers, just love and trust. Her words, not mine. Words she once laughed about at my kitchen table, drinking wine barefoot, acting as if she owned the world. But when Hans saw the name on that deed, the Sarah May Foundation, his mouth went dry. It wasn't hers. It had never been. The woman he thought was his meal ticket had lied to him about the one thing he cared about more than her, his own financial security. I wasn't there for their argument, but Ingrid was. She was in her office 2 doors down from the clerks and heard everything when Hans stormed back in, dragging Isabel with him. "You said it was yours," he hissed. "You told me your father gave it to you 5 years ago." "He did," she snapped back. "Then why isn't your name on any of the damn documents?" Silence, followed by a sound Ingrid described as a whimper disguised as defiance. That was always Isabel's way when she was trapped. She was loud until the ground gave out beneath her. Hans's voice dropped even lower. "He's cold. He's accusing. You falsified something, didn't you?" He was not mistaken. Back in 2020, while I was recovering from surgery, Isabel had taken a copy of the home insurance renewal and filed a claim, forging my signature on a refinance document, just enough to secure temporary access to a line of equity. I never even noticed. She paid the money back before the billing cycle ended. It was a silent act of betrayal. At the time, I convinced myself that perhaps I had signed it. The pain medication could play tricks on a person's memory. But she had relied on that uncertainty. She had used it as a weapon. And now, that same act was coming back to destroy her. Hans was no saint either. What Isabel didn't know, but I did, was that he had been secretly transferring money into a cryptocurrency account under a fake name. It was a habit from his startup days, before the IRS came after him. He had married Isabel because she was a way out, a house, a car, and a respectable name in the community. But the moment the house slipped through their fingers, Hans had no reason to keep up appearances. He filed for separation a week later. 2 days after that, he froze their joint bank account and took the car. Isabel called the bank to ask why the balance was zero. They told her she no longer had access. The call lasted under 2 minutes. She didn't scream this time, she just fell silent. Meanwhile, I sat with Greta on the steps of the library, feeding pigeons stale bread from a paper bag. "Do you know what I want to be when I grow up?" she asked me, her mouth covered in cinnamon crumbs. "What is that?" "A lawyer," she said. "So people can't get away with stealing things." I nodded. "That's a very good reason." She tilted her head. "Did someone try to steal from you, Grandpa?" The wind shifted. I looked at her, really looked at her. 8 years old, with her mother's eyes but a soul free of rust. "No," I said slowly. "They tried, but I was watching." She smiled, not fully comprehending. But she would, someday. Later that evening, a letter arrived. It wasn't from Isabel, but from her lawyer. It was a request to reconsider the Foundation's occupancy policy due to familial history and recent financial hardship. In other words, she wanted back in the house. The answer was already prepared. It was in the Foundation's bylaws, Clause 7C. Under no circumstances may any direct relative of the founder reside within Foundation property unless they qualify for an academic, artistic, or community service grant. Isabel met none of the requirements. The reply was sent with a formal tone and no possibility of appeal. That night, Hans left town. Isabel called me, the first time in months. She didn't leave a message. She just let it ring 4 times. I listened to the following silence and hung up. I didn't need to answer. I didn't need to say anything at all. Everything that needed to be said had already been put in writing, notarized, and filed in places they never thought to check. They never thought I could outsmart them. But I did. I wasn't just her father, I was her first teacher in strategy. She just forgot the cardinal rule I taught her at age 10 over a chessboard where she never once won against me: when you're too busy trying to take a piece, you forget the king is always watching. And this king had already made his final move. Some stories conclude with a bang. Mine concluded with a quiet letter. No threats, no anger, just the truth on heavy paper. A truth they could not undo, scream over, or destroy without consequences. Let me explain. After Isabel and Hans turned on each other, they assumed I was finished. With the house out of their reach and the Foundation secure, they believed the rest of my affairs were just scattered leaves waiting for the wind. But they had forgotten the true roots of this tree ran deep. Years ago, while they ridiculed my refusal to retire, rolled their eyes when I kept receipts in labeled binders, or laughed when I studied state laws for fun, I was getting ready for this. Because I always knew, not that they would betray me in such detail, but that a day would come when I would have to protect the future from my own blood. So, I made a plan and enclosed it in a letter. The letter was addressed not to Isabel or Hans, but to Greta, to be opened on her 19th birthday. It explained everything. Final testament and the price of deceit. The letter explained how the trust was structured. The house she was born in would one day be hers, not as an inheritance, but as a reward for merit. She would need to apply to the Foundation as a community advocate, present a service project, and complete a year of work. Only then would the board vote. She could accept the house or walk away. I couldn't just hand it to her, because dignity isn't passed down, it's earned. That's a lesson they all forgot. The envelope contained more, a handwritten timeline, notarized documents, transaction records, and a full account of what Emily had done. It detailed how she siphoned funds from the Foundation's youth scholarship program for her wellness retreat with Brent, and how she sold Foundation artwork at private auctions, pocketing the cash. None of it was illegal, but all of it was traceable. The letter wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity. When Sophie stood at that crossroads someday, wondering why her mother had lost everything and why people whispered about her, she would know the truth. One copy of the letter was placed in a secure digital archive, with instructions to be shared with the Foundation board if Emily ever challenged the bylaws. Another went to Russell Kay, a friend and local paper editor. I coached his son in Little League. Only publish this, I told him, if she tries to go public and twist the story. He read it twice, then folded it gently. You've thought of everything, he said. No, I replied, just enough. 2 weeks later, Emily made her move. She filed a lawsuit against the Foundation, claiming wrongful revocation of a familial right of access. It made headlines, just as she wanted. She booked an interview, painting a picture of a father who abandoned his family for a legacy, and was brainwashed by non-profit vultures. It aired on a local podcast and gained some traction. For a moment, she felt powerful again. That's when Russell published my letter, verbatim. No embellishment, no commentary, just a black and white reprint of my handwriting, with the title, A Father's Truth for His Granddaughter. I hope we'll know better. Emily didn't sue again. She issued a statement about privacy and editorial bias, but the damage was already done. Not to me, but to her. Brent disappeared without a word. Emily's social calendar dried up, and her name quietly vanished from donor lists. People didn't confront her, they simply stopped inviting her. The silence was crueler than any courtroom could be. One afternoon, Sophie, now 10 years old, found me at the library. Mom sat a lot, she said. I nodded. She says you tricked her. What do you think? I asked. She hesitated. I think people who hide things are scared. And people who tell the truth are brave, even when it hurts. I didn't say anything, but I gave her a small, unmarked wooden box. Inside was a blank journal. On the first page, I had written, for the stories you'll tell one day. Tell them well. Tell them honestly, and never let anyone write your ending for you. That was the real inheritance, a clean page and the right to write her own story. They never apologized, not in words, not in gestures, not even in silence filled with remorse. And I never asked them to. By the time the dust settled, with the house out of their reach and the Foundation secure, an apology would have been cheap. I wasn't looking for regret, I was waiting for silence. The kind that falls when power shifts. The kind that settles in a house once filled with noise and entitlement, now emptied by its own greed. That was justice. And it didn't come with a bang. It came with the soft click of Emily's key no longer fitting the lock. It came in the heavy stillness of a voicemail greeting never being returned. It came in the library board's decision to quietly remove her name from the annual gala program and replace it with anonymous patron. They weren't punished, they were forgotten. That was enough. In the following months, I joined a local veterans writing group. I didn't need to tell war stories. I needed to hear other men talk about survival. Some spoke of combat, others of cancer. One man had lost a son to addiction, another was going through his 4th divorce. We didn't offer advice. We just listened. In that room, where nobody needed to prove anything, I found something I hadn't known I missed: respect. The quiet kind. Not the applause at a gala, or Dad of the Year kind. Just the nod across the circle that says, I see you. Sophie kept coming to the library. By now she was on a first-name basis with the staff. She started a teen reading group, choosing books about truth, ethics, and community. I never suggested a single title. She found her own voice. Sometimes I caught her sketching in the margins of her notebook, tiny pencil drawings of buildings, trees, and people. She told me once she wanted to be an architect. Not for houses, she said, but for places that matter. I didn't say anything, but inside I felt something shift. Maybe legacy isn't what you build. Maybe it's who carries the tools. The foundation, now completely out of Emily's reach, began to grow again, slowly and organically. The community knew. The schools knew. And when a young counselor named Teresa nominated Sophie for the junior board a year early, I didn't pull any strings. I just watched. She presented a project about creating a mobile library van for underserved neighborhoods. When the board asked why it mattered to her, she didn't hesitate. My mother always told stories that served her, she said. My grandfather let me find the ones that served others. The board voted unanimously. She didn't cry. She just smiled. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight that had lived behind my ribs for a decade begin to lift. I wrote a new will. Not because I had more to protect, but because I had someone worth protecting it for. I named Sophie trustee of the foundation, effective when she turned 25. Until then, a rotating council of 3 non-family members would guide her, teach her, and challenge her. I left Emily $1, just one. Not out of spite, but as a legal confirmation that she had not been forgotten, only disqualified. I left Brent nothing, not even a sentence. His absence had become his legacy. And that, I think, was the truest sentence I ever wrote. Years passed. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Real justice is a table you build slowly, plank by plank, nail by nail, and then step away from, letting others sit down and eat in peace. That's what I did. I didn't attend Emily's bankruptcy hearing. I didn't return her last email, a bitter line about Sophie's manipulation. I didn't reply. Sophie didn't ask. Some things don't need answering. This past spring, Sophie invited me to her college acceptance ceremony. She had been accepted to Cornell for architecture. When she stepped to the podium to deliver her class speech, I expected something about perseverance, about dreams, about the future. Instead, she told a story about a man who once lay in a hospital bed, thought to be dying, but woke to hear what no father should ever hear. And how that man didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't fall apart. He listened, then lived. She ended with one sentence, I owe my voice to the man who chose not to use his. I wept, not because I was proud, but because I was finally at peace. Thank you for listening.